gas masks and hand grenades. Gas masks and hand grenades. Gas masks and hand grenades. Gas masks and hand grenades.
Hey, what is happening, YouTube? We are back with an interview today with an old buddy of mine going way back. We were just talking about that. Probably, we actually go back to 99, Steve, when we first met there in the Phantasmagoria, which was like I said, when we talked back in February, it was kind of like a fry bar mixed with a used CD store, mixed with a venue sort of in the back, which was kind of crazy. So back in the old days, the Stupid Dream tour it was, and we've been buddies a long time. And one of the shared projects that you do that has always struck a chord with me is the Bass Communion project, which is your generally solitary, but not always actually, sort of a found sound, droney, experimental sort of project that you've been doing. Quite frankly, you've probably been doing this longer than you've been doing pretty much everything else, right? Would you agree with that, kind of?
I think that's probably fair comment, because I it's well documented that my first sort of explorations musically were just making silly sounds,
Right.
I was never that kid that wanted to learn how to play the guitar or write songs. I just wanted to make weird sounds, and my father, being an electronic engineer, kind of facilitated that with all the stuff he used to make me.
Right.
And there were always things like reel-to-reel tape machines, like you can see in the background here. There was always stuff like that lying around the house that my father was sort of dabbling with and making, so I guess in a way that really is. In fact, I've talked about this a fair bit. There's a lot of that element which has fed into everything else I've done over the years. And even though I'm known as essentially someone that makes rock music, there's a strong sound design aesthetic, for want of a better word, that goes through all that stuff too, which comes from that kind of curiosity just about making weird sounds. And Bass Communion is the most pure sort of form of that, I suppose. Right. In my and the least accessible, which makes me love it all the more, and the people that like it, I think, kind of appreciate that there's a kind of no compromise aspect to it, which is what I love in other artists, when I feel that there's something pure about a project that's no concessions at all, no concessions to songwriting, no concessions to melody, harmony, rhythm. It's just sound. I love it.
Pure sound, yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason we're here, the reason that I asked you to come on today and you so graciously agreed, was you got a new Bass Communion album out. And it was kind of, when I read the press release back in March, I was kind of like, wait, it's been 12 years? Like, it kind of, how we were talking before we went on, it's 20 years ago that I was, at least this is what you told me, and I believe it's probably true, is that I was probably the first guy to approach you about interviewing you exclusively about Bass Communion. We didn't really, we tangentially talked about some of those other things, but it was pretty much predominantly about the Ghost on Magnetic Tape album, which came out in, I believe, January of 2004 or late 2003. I'm not sure. You probably don't even remember either.
I don't remember, no. A long time ago, yeah. And still probably my favorite, actually, of the Bass Communion records, that one, yeah.
Is it really? Really?
I think so. Yeah, that was a sort of peak for me. Certainly from that period. Yeah, I'm very proud. Still very proud of that one. Yeah.
Well, you had a lot of time back then to still kind of focus on that. That leg of your career in terms of all the various different things that you have done and accomplished between writing, recording, touring, remixing, all that, and producing and things like that. So you had a lot of time back then, which you don't now these days. It's a little more streamlined and focused on. No?
Well, that is partly true, but that's not the reason that it took 12 years to make a new record. I think and this is probably something we should talk about.
Yeah, get into that.
Yeah. So what? So if I can paraphrase you, why didn't I make an album for 12 years? So the simple answer is that I know I felt that the world of, for want of a better word, ambient music or drone music or noise music or experiment, that kind of whole world
Mm-hmm.
has become so overpopulated with a lot of great stuff. Don't get me wrong, I'm not dissing the music, but it's become very overpopulated because it's very easy now. Not easy, but it's easier than it's ever been for someone to go and get a looping pedal or to download some plugins and to get like a digital workstation downloaded onto their laptop and
Right.
mess about with sound and to create quote unquote experimental noise, ambient music. It's never been easier. And I think that, and allied to the fact we now have platforms like Bandcamp, which enable people to put that stuff on
Sure.
sale,
Right.
it's just a proliferation of this kind of music. As I say, some of which is great. Not all of it is great. And I think I found myself looking at that and saying to myself, do I really need to add to that mountain of of ambient drone experimental music? There's a lot of people out there doing it, and it's all they do. So who am I?
Do you feel, in other words, then it's kind of the gene pool's become a bit diluted in terms of how much?
Partly, but I think it's also partly me thinking there are people out there, that's what they do, that's all they do. Who am
Right.
I, who's someone who just dabbles in this area
Yeah.
part-time, to sort of unload my shit into the pool as well? Why don't we let these guys, this is what they do. And I say there's some amazing guys out there doing it, and there's a lot of fodder too, of course there is, but that's always been the case. But I think just everything now is multiplied by 10, generally in the world.
Right.
Everything is
Of course.
10 times more movies, 10 times more albums, 10 times, whatever you can think of, there's 10 times more of it now.
Yeah, you can make this stuff on your iPhone with GarageBand.
Exactly.
It's that simple. I've done it with
Exactly.
the plugins that they have there. I made cool little Gary Newman-esque sort of synthy things, and it's like, oh, this is cool. But
it's like you say, and you can do it in a very convincing way. And it's
quickly.
only natural. It's only natural, I think, as human beings, it's only natural for us that when we create something that we're proud of,
We want to share.
to want to see it reflected back at us in the mirror.
Yeah.
To see other people listening and experiencing and engaging with it. That's totally natural. That's why I release records.
Sure.
And probably too many over the years, because I need that kick of seeing myself reflected back in the mirror. So this is all a roundabout way of saying I think I stepped back from that area and decided to do the other stuff that I felt was more unique for the last 20. But I have been making the music all this time. Like I say on the record sleeve, this music is drawn from about 12 years worth of recordings, a lot of stuff. And the pieces I've selected are the pieces that I feel are different somehow, different from everything I've done before, bass communion, and perhaps different from a lot of the other ambient drone noise music I hear. I'm not saying it's the best music I had, but it's the music I felt was the most unique and probably deserved to exist in the public realm, if that makes sense.
Well, let's go back in time a little bit in terms of the history of bass community. You kind of talked a little bit about how a lot of it was sort of the instigatory moments where your father creating these cool machines behind you, multi-track recorders. Kind of cool to have a dad like that. Not many people have a dad like that, right?
Yeah.
But were there specific artists, and I kind of know the answer to this, so I'm cheating a little bit here because we've talked about it, but were there specific artists in the early days of you starting to create and have a voice that maybe was beyond like me, that's just my bedroom? Yeah, I could share it on, and of course we didn't have the platforms back then that we do now. I don't remember when SoundCloud came around. That's probably been around about 20 years, somewhere in that range, 25. Yeah. But were there specific things that really made you go, oh, because I know a lot of your early, you talk about a lot about your early influences, like early Pink Floyd and Donna Summer and these conceptual, Alan Parsons and things like that. But what were the instigatory weird things out there that made you go, oh, there's something beyond a pop structure to a
right? Well, that's I mean, that would be a very long answer, and it would go through many years and many discoveries and many epiphanies, musical epiphanies.
Continuing evolvement too, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's very simply. So, Dark Side of the Moon is an album which has a lot of sound design on it.
Yeah.
And this is the first album I remember really engaging with and hearing my father play. And of course, a lot of what makes that album special is the sound design, use of found sounds, clocks ticking, cash registers, voices, weird electronic sounds. Moving on from that, I discovered more of the Floyd stuff. Amagama was a very big record for me, very experimental record. Then discovering things like krautrock, so Cluster, Tangerine Dream, Klaus Schulze, Popol Vuh. And then probably in the late 80s, discovering, or the mid 80s, discovering industrial culture, Throbbing Gristle, Cabaret Voltaire.
Right.
And actually that was interesting because that whole scene was also connected to this idea of cassette culture. And you mentioned how back in the day there wasn't things like SoundCloud and Bandcamp. No,
It was a
but
cassette.
there was cassette culture.
Yeah.
And you could make your own cassette and you could advertise it through the pages of music papers like Melody Maker and Sounds at the time, as they were at the time, and people would buy them. And I made some early cassettes. I was on compilation cassettes, doing weird stuff, just playing, drones on my father's Farfisa organ with sort of radio sounds mixed in, and all that shit. So and then it just carries on from there. And then in the 90s, discovering stuff like Thomas Kerner and Rappoon and Soviet France and all that weird sort of stuff. So it kind of all fed into it. And I started making my own music again in earnest, I think probably around that time in that style. Yeah.
What was, I think I recall you telling me too in that first interview that we had, which by the way, I'm going to pull up in a minute here just so people can, and it is in the, I put a link in the description so people can go read what we talked about literally 20 years ago and what we're talking about now. And
I'm looking at it right now. Yeah.
Sort of draw some comparisons and whatnot. It was, look, I did not profess to be a professional. I've never been a professional, but it was kind of the fanboy in me approaching you about it. And I do remember you being pretty excited about it because it was something, it was different. Nobody was coming at you about Porcupine Tree or No Man and the stuff that you were well known for or becoming well known for at that point in time. So it was kind of a fun thing to do. And I really felt like that needed addressing. But I recall you saying that a lot of the music, or oftentimes the music, is inspired by like one single source, whether it's a piano note or a drone from a synthesizer or a guitar chord or whatever. Talk a little bit about the creative process for Bass Commune as a whole, and then we'll kind of tie it into the new album, which I'll bring up and show. I did not get my copy.
Okay.
Ooh, Richard, I was waiting for my copy.
That's a shame. Okay, so yes, so I like this idea. Okay, so this comes back to my, I suppose this comes back to my interest in concepts, having a concept for a record. So that applies to the rock music, lyrically and musically, but it also applies to Bass Commune in the sense that I like to have a theme or a particular starting point for a record. Now, on a record like Ghosts on Magnetic Tape, for example, it was the sound of the piano and the sound of vinyl record noise. They were the two main components. Moving forward to an album like Molotov and Haze, that was all done on guitar. Then the album that came out in 2011, Cenotaph, was all using choral sounds, quiet sounds of sampled choirs.
Vocals, right.
Yeah, some of which I'd recorded myself for some of my solo albums. So mutating those things. So this album, the main elements on this album are my trusty Mellotron and audio artifacts, by which I mean things like tape hiss, wow, flutter, things that usually people like myself spend a lot of time trying to get rid of.
Yeah.
And and obviously I'm not the only one to be fascinated by these things. The last 20 years or so, I've seen a lot of people moving towards making music using things like vinyl, crackle, and so to the point there on this album, there's a 12-minute piece which is constructed entirely from the sound of tape hiss, cassette hiss.
Right.
Now that makes it sound very academic, And I like to think actually not. It's got something quite beautiful and pure and musical about it, but I'll let you decide when you hear it. But so those are the two main elements on this album. So in a way, creating a limitation in terms of the sources you're using forces you to be more creative in
More creative, yeah.
the way you process the sounds, the way different ways you can look at, mutate, and process sounds. So yeah, so that's something that's always interested me, having this kind of limited. There was a Japanese noise artist who died about 5 years ago. He went under the name of Aub. I don't know if you've heard of Aub, Aube, Aub.
Oh yeah, I remember him.
Yeah.
Yep. I've got an album. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he did something similar. Every single album has a single sound source. So one of his albums would be based on the sound of water. One of them would be based on the sound of metal. One would be based on the sound of him ripping pages out of a Bible and crunching them up. I love that shit. So it's a very conceptual way of. It's the kind of thing that people like Stockhausen and John Cage were doing way back in in the 50s, having a concept before they had anything else, before they'd written a note of music. They had a concept. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, you note those two guys. I mean, they're very much, easily pointed to as kind of like the impetus of this style in a lot of ways, right? I mean, it really does kind of start with those guys, theremin music, or I remember Silver Apples was way back then too. Right now, they weren't doing so much this. He wasn't. It was a guy, right? Was it a guy or a girl? I can't remember.
It was two guys. Silver Apples was a drummer and a drummer who sang, and a guy on a synthesizer. Yeah, very experimental. Yeah,
right. And that I remember you even did didn't you do a remix of or with?
They did a remix of No Man. Yeah, they did a remix. Right. Of No Man. Yeah, unfortunately, I think he's passed away now. The main guy, Simeon. Yeah, no, but I mean, it goes. I think the thing is, the more you sort of think about where did it start, the more you realize it's actually a never-ending travel back in time.
Yeah,
because you can go back to things like Stravinsky, and composers who were using dissonance and texture. Debussy was always very good at using just texture to create feelings in the music. Minimalist music obviously goes back to the 60s as well. I think you can certainly go back to early 20th century, I think, and look at some of those early serial composers, 12 people that were going beyond the 12-tone scale.
You look at movies like old horror movies where, for example, a really cool example that would be the noise that Godzilla would make when he would come up out of or get ready to attack or whatever. That was just a bowed viola or maybe a bass. I can't remember which one, but they drag the bow across the strings. It would make that that sort of roaring.
I love that stuff. I love that stuff. That's why in a way it's although it's wonderful these days that people have these the easy way they can create music and sound. There's something special about these guys having to kind of create the rule book themselves, having to find ways to make abstract sound, because you couldn't just open a laptop and drag some loops into your workstation, and they had to literally create the vocabulary of electronic music from scratch. I think if there is a sort of real sort of year zero for this, it's probably what Pierre Schaeffer was doing around 1950, so the middle of the 20th century. Pierre Schaeffer, the first guy that made something that we now know as music concrete, which is music that is made from the sounds that are around us.
Right.
So he was taking recordings of trains, of crowds, and creating music. I think he was having to cut vinyl records and then use those to sort of, incredible, sort of Heath Robinson contraptions to make this music.
Yeah.
But that's probably, I would say probably that's the year zero for what we now think of as the modern avant-garde experimental electronic music. Yeah.
So this is the cover of the new album. Like I said, I've got mine on order, but it didn't show up. They did. Initially, it was 1,000 pressed CDs in a Japanese style with an obi and all that stuff like that. But I think they expanded it to 1,500 now.
I've okayed another 500. Yeah,
okay.
But I think that will be it. I like the idea.
You like that limited
small editions. Yeah, because it's like it's not for everyone, this music, obviously, and I
Right.
mean, obviously, it will be available digitally as well. It's on my Bandcamp page, but I like the idea of these small, hopefully not, sort of elitist. I like to think of them more as more exclusive, so they are special, and when you own them, I feel this way myself. When I own something limited, I feel like I own something really special.
Special.
It's like
Yeah.
owning a painting, isn't it, that no one else has got? Although
Yeah.
in this case, another 1,499 people have got it. But you know what I mean. I like the idea
Yeah.
of small sort of boutique editions.
Well,
Yeah,
and it makes sense for this type of music.
yeah,
I mean, your email to me when you sent me the Dropbox link was, it's a weird one, and I'm like, well, yeah, but they're all weird. I mean, but they're good weird. And the thing that's always grabbed me, and I do have to lay you out here for a minute, because
go
you
on.
have spent a fuck ton of my money. I'm just saying, I'm okay with it, but you've spent a lot of my money, and it started right around this 2001 period when I discovered. I'm trying to remember what I believe I must have discovered probably the first, not the atmospherics, but the first bass community. It might have been bass community too. It doesn't matter, but um, I was hooked right away. It wasn't an avenue of music that I ever really thought would speak to me, you know, but there was something about it that was calming, and even the noise stuff was, even in a weird, strange way, it got inside my head, and it made me sort of focus, because I'm an ADHD guy, and I'm
Mm,
always trying to do 18 different things and never really achieving the things I want to with some of those things. But it had a calming effect with me. And I remember telling you that I would fall asleep
yeah,
listening to those early Bass Communion albums.
yeah,
Even a song like Amphead, which was
yeah.
just an Amphead that you recorded and then filtered and processed and distorted, was one of my favorite songs back
Well,
then.
that's
Because
interesting. Now, that's very, sorry to interrupt you, Jeff. That's very interesting you mentioned that track, because I think that track, if anything, is the precedent for this new record.
yeah, I heard it.
Because it is just the hiss coming from an amp
Yep.
that I filtered into this beautiful kind of texture. And so this in many ways is the precedent for what I've done on this new record. Yeah.
I'm gonna pull that down one sec here. And I haven't done this in a while, so I'm trying to remember how to get that thing off there. All right, there we go. Yeah, so back in those early days when I kind of, and I remember sort of dipping my toe, thanks to you and your playlist. Again, this is what spent a lot of my money. I would read your playlist I think you did that monthly, or was it a weekly
Yeah.
thing? Yeah.
I think I just did it on a whim. Yeah, I would sort of
Yeah.
update my playlist on a whim from time to time. Yeah, when I felt
Yeah,
like
and on there was stuff like Lustmord and
mm,
Square Pusher and
mm,
Auteka and all these weird things. I
mm,
was like, under normal circumstances, I realize this now. I never would have actually gone and investigated that stuff because it was outside my wheelhouse. But I felt like if you appreciated it and there was something you were doing, you had that influence on me to go, well, just
mm.
be open-minded. A great example of that is Opeth. When you first said, you got to check this band out, and I was like, dude, those vocals, man, ugh.
Mm.
And you're like, yeah, but you listen to Frontline Assembly, and
Yeah,
they're kind of the same. And I'm like,
yeah,
fuck all, he's right. He's totally right. He
yeah,
nailed me right to the cross.
yeah,
And then Opeth became one of my favorite bands of all time. So, you have to be open to the portals have to be open, and you have to be willing to take something in. Now, I've done something recently that no one in the world would have predicted for me. I actually bought several hip hop albums, man, and I just always stayed way away. It was like, that is
right,
not my thing.
right.
But somebody turned me on to this Deltron 3030 album. Do you know that?
No, I don't know.
Oh my god, dude.
Eltron Futurity. I'm going to make a note of that.
Oh my god. It
Okay,
is like a fucking rock opera in hip hop that is stunning, man. It's
okay,
amazing. I think you're going to get back to me and go, thumbs up.
okay, great.
But even Dalek, Dalek, right? I'm sure.
Dialect I know very well. Yeah, in fact,
Yeah.
Will did a couple of remixes for me a few years
Okay.
ago.
Oh, that's right. Back on
Yeah.
the first album. Yeah.
He did one for Incendies. He did one for to the bone as well. Yeah, he's great. I love Dialect, and obviously those Techno Animal albums as well. Brotherhood of the Bomb, they're phenomenal.
Yeah.
With industrial hip hop records, I love that shit. Yeah.
But if you told me that I was going to get into that stuff recently, I'd have been like, "Get out of here, man! There's no fucking."
Well, but isn't that the beauty of music? You know, I think one thing, and again, this is where I start to sound like I'm being a bit holier than thou, and I don't mean to be. I really don't mean to be. But part of me is always disappointed that it seems most people's musical taste kind of arrests around about their early 20s.
Yeah.
In other words, they stop being open to new things, and it's just the way it seems to be. So so I come across this quite a lot, because obviously one of the things I love to do is confront the expectations of my fans and my listeners.
Yeah.
And obviously one of the things that come up time and time again is people that only listen to progressive rock or progressive metal, and I'm giving them an album like The Future Bites. I know you weren't a fan of that, but anyway, I'm giving them an album like The Future Bites, or I'm giving them bass community music. And no, don't apologize. It's fine. And obviously, I do get quite a lot of pushback on that, which I kind of I thrive on that in a way.
You kind of dig that. I know you enough to know that you're like, fuck those people. I did what I did.
I don't say it as brutally as that, but I understand that part of the deal is if you confront the expectations of your audience, you will disappoint some of them quite a lot of the time, and that's part of the deal. You know, obviously you'll disappoint some of them if you just do the same as well. So you can't, you know, you kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. So my philosophy has always been, do what you want, and just, you know, have faith in your audience to have an open mind. And not all of them will go with you, but some of them will. And bass community, I suppose, is the purest distillation of that, in the sense it's very confrontational for people that are only used to listening to rock music or metal
pop
music
structures
or prog rock or pop structures. Yeah, because there's no melody, no harmony, and no rhythm. So for a lot of people, those three things being absent would mean it doesn't even meet the basic criteria to qualify as music at all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
but then I would say to those same people, when you watch a horror movie, your emotions are being manipulated by sound and sound design as pure texture, and you are responding emotionally to sound as pure texture.
Yeah.
Whether
Good example of that. This just came in the other day.
What is that?
This is House on Haunted Hill with Vincent Price.
Yeah.
Great sound design on this thing. Waxworks. I don't know if you buy anything from Waxworks.
I've got a couple of their records. Yeah, beautiful.
They do killer reissues. Love the reissues. But you're right. Like that, generally, there's not pop songs, or there's not typical what we would think of as rock or pop. You know, the verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus thing.
Not only is there not verse or chorus, a lot of the time there's no melody, no harmony, and no rhythm.
No rhythm. Exactly.
So if you think those are the three basic, you know, sort of fundamental sort of elements that make music for most people, but of course there is a fourth one: timbre, texture.
Yes.
And ambient and drone music and industrial music
all about that.
Reduce it to pure timbre and texture, and that is a very potent thing, as horror movies constantly demonstrate. Because a lot. Look at a movie like Eraserhead or any of David Lynch's movies, and your sense of dread sometimes is just enhanced just by a wall of white noise. I mean, Lynch was brilliant at that. Brilliant at that. You disappear into the radiator and you just hear this.
Yes. Yep.
And it's the scariest fucking thing.
Do you remember Sleep Research Facility? Do you remember that?
Absolutely. I have a couple of Nostromo. I have brilliant.
Very much in that vein. I think they were on Malignant Records, I believe. Malignant.
They might be. The one I've got is on Cold Spring, and it's a kind of homage to the Alien movie, first Alien movie, which of course also has a lot of that sound of the humming of the ship. You know, the sort of the ambient
being
sound.
alive.
Alive.
Yeah.
The mechanical sounds of the ship, and a lot of the sound design, but that's all feeding into your sense of dread and anxiety. And sometimes that is what I want from music as well. Strange that I am. Yeah.
I mean, and that, you know, listening to the new album, I have listened to it a couple of times now already. And when I got your message saying it's a weird one, I'm like, you know, like I said, I'm thinking, well, they're all weird. You know, I mean, in the conventional sense of music, they're all weird. Nobody is going to pick this up and go, oh, throw that on while I'm at a
Sure, no,
dinner party.
relatively speaking, they're all good.
Right.
But this one in the catalog is a little bit noisier and perhaps more difficult,
Now,
I
see,
think.
I disagree in
Oh,
that.
okay. I'm very happy to hear that.
To be honest with you, I think there's a lot of very easily digestible songs and one or two that are a little tricky that we'll talk about in a minute here. But I think that you've done other stuff that's far more abrasive. For example, Continuum 2, which I know isn't Bass Communion, but
Right.
it's an extension of Bass Communion
Sure.
through what you were doing with Dirk, and then Molotov and Hayes is pretty
Yes, that's
fucking
got some
abrasive.
real noise. That is true. Yeah, that is true. I think the way I kind of think of it in my mind is I always think of my fan like the typical progressive rock fan that listens to Yes and Genesis and Pink Floyd, and he's being presented with a 12-minute piece for tape hiss.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I'm always thinking to myself, what's that person going to make of this? So maybe I shouldn't be sort of preempting myself. I must feel I'm apologizing for the music beforehand,
yeah.
But I mean that's quite a difficult thing to present. I love it,
But
personally.
you should know with me,
Yeah.
that's not who I've ever been. So
No, I suppose I should know better than to preempt how you might feel about something. Yeah.
But it's very cool. I'm looking forward to getting the physical copy because I'm like you. I want to own.
I
I
think
need
it's
something tangible. I need a tactile thing that I
well,
can.
and also, yeah, and absolutely, and I feel the same. And also, I think the Bass Communion thing now is very much this symbiotic thing between Carl's artwork and the music.
Yes,
I feel they are so connected now.
symbiotic.
There's this series of covers that are so, to me, they are the music, and the music is the covers. Those images, those lonely images without
Are all
anything.
those places that he shot
Yeah.
those? Because I've seen you with him a lot. You've done some field shots where you're in the. Are they all similar in a similar place, or are they all over the place in England?
No, they're all a sort of similar part of England where Carl grew up, which is a place called Kent, which is sort of southeast of England.
Yeah.
But Carl has he has a gift for making these landscapes look somehow they have a sense of otherness to them, that they're not
Mhm.
real places, that they could be they're almost like they're other planets, and they're not. They are places in the United Kingdom, but it's something about his eye or the way he processes the images. And of course, there's a very strong analogy between that and the music and the sound of the music. It has a sense of otherness to it, at least I like to think it does, that I find it very hard now to think of the music without thinking of Carl's artwork with it. So for me, that's a very special relationship that's grown up with the music and the artwork.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Carl's kind of iconic with a lot of your work. I mean, you mentioned Bass Communion, but No Man would be the other
Yes.
clear sort of. The imagery is so tied in with what you expect to hear or what you don't expect to hear in some ways. Did he do? Was he also? Did he do the work on IEM? And I wanted to touch on IEM because IEM is a project that is kind of. Is it laid to rest or is it just dormant for good?
No, it's laid to rest. I just did 2 or 3 records very quickly in a very short period of time, at a time when everyone was jumping on the krautrock bandwagon, including myself.
Right.
It was sort of late 90s, and I did those 3 records very quickly. I had fun doing them. I didn't overthink them. They were kind of a little bit of a release for me from writing, the more sort of structured, considered version of the work of Porcupine Tree.
Right.
I just went in a bit like Porcupine Tree started. Porcupine Tree started this very sort of instant, improvised, semi-improvised music, and we kind of lost that by the time of Stupid Dream. It was very considered, very structured. So IEM became the sort of outlet for the more quote unquote psychedelic improvised music. But again, I felt like I looked around and I saw all these amazing people doing like Godspeed You Black Emperor, and all these guys like Mogwai. And I'm thinking, why am I doing my half-assed, version of this? These guys are the pros. Let them do it. So I kind of, I
still think Have Come for Your Children is one of my favorite things that you've ever done.
Thank you.
That is it's a trippy
It's
psychedelic, you
yes,
know.
yeah,
I'm not a guy that's ever done psychedelics, so I can't
right.
really say for sure. I've talked to a lot of people that have done them, so I kind of have
Mm,
a window into what it would be like, and it's not a place I think I want to go. But
mm,
that album has that sort of narcotic-y, blown out,
right.
tripped out bizarreness to it that I just still go back to. I still go back to that album
Wow. You know, I haven't listened to
fairly
it.
regularly.
I haven't listened to it probably for 20 years. I should go and listen to it again. I remember being really, you know, enthralled to. You know, remember Acid Mother's Temple, that
Oh
Japanese?
yeah, yeah. The
Yeah,
Paradiso,
that's right. Yeah,
yeah, the
those
Japanese band, right?
yeah,
Japanese psych
Japanese
band, right?
band, yeah. So those guys were doing that stuff, and they were doing it better, and they were knocking it out. So I felt, you know, again, a bit like I was saying earlier with the basement. I looked around and I thought to myself, you know, there's too much of this stuff already coming out. Why are you adding to the pile? But I'm really happy you like that. I remember being quite proud of that record at the time. I should go back and listen to it. Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned like Acid Mother Temple or
Mm.
Merzbow or something like that, and then you say there's too much of that stuff out there. Those are some of the classic violators of that, I would say, in some respects, where they just pump album after album,
Yeah.
or they did. I don't know.
And they still do. Merzbow still does. I
Merzbow's
think
still
that's
doing that thing where he's putting out
Brothers.
an album every couple
Oh, at
weeks or
least,
whatever.
yeah. And a lot of them are 6 CD boxes. I know because I still buy them from time to
Do
time.
you really?
And then wonder why, because there's nothing really new that he's adding to his, you know, sound. But you know, I think part of the whole, I think this is somebody that, again, people maybe coming from the tradition of rock and pop music don't necessarily understand that there is almost like a performance art element that's going on with experimental music too.
Yeah.
There's an artist. One of the artists that fascinates me is this guy David Jackman, who records under the name of Organum. Have you heard of
We
Organum?
got him. Sure, sure. I
Yeah,
have a couple. Yeah.
yeah. So he's fascinating because he keeps releasing albums, and it's almost like he's releasing the same album over and over again.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, it's I buy the new album, I put it on. This is the same piece, and then you analyze it, and it's very slightly different. You
Slightly, subtly different. Yeah.
very slightly different, but it's essentially, it's like a paint. You know, you think of some of these painters that essentially painted the same thing their whole life. You know, like Rothko essentially painted variations on the same, you know,
The
concept
theme.
over and over
Mhm.
again, slight different variations of color and grading, but essentially the same painting. And there's something about the experimental world. So some of these people you talk about, Merzbow, Muslim Gauze would be another one, where they're so ridiculously prolific.
Yes.
And some of the albums feel almost interchangeable. But if you become a fan and if you buy into that, you kind of buy into that part of it too, that there is this by necessity repetition going on, that some of the albums are, but it's like you just want to collect the whole lot. And I am like that, I'm afraid, with some of these artists myself. You know, I probably have way too many Merzbow records. Um,
Yeah.
but so I think Base Communion is the opposite in that sense, is that I feel like if I'm going to release a new record, I want it to stand up in the catalog as something different. And that's something I would also say, by the way, about my solo career. Yeah.
A good segue there. Are you still an active listener of this genre of music
Yeah.
on the regular, in terms of, going back to 20 years? I hate to keep being nostalgic here, but we have a long history of sharing musics and things like that. And as I said, you were a guy that I think you were the guy, not a guy. You were the guy that really got me to examine my constructs of listening, and you challenged me with some weird shit that turned out, and I'll mention a name that I think will warm the cockles of your heart, so to speak. Do you remember Aquarius Records and how they would put those amazing
Yeah.
write-ups up with those
Oh,
shitty
I miss that.
MP3 samples?
Yeah,
Man, do I miss that so bad, dude. I
miss that.
spent so much crazy money
Me
there.
too. Me too. And I discovered so many artists. Just by, it was Alan. Was that his name? Alan, that used to write all the reviews. I discovered so many artists. Andy, yeah. I discovered so many artists just reading their mail outs. Yeah. Yeah,
And he
absolutely.
did an amazing job. You'd
Yeah.
read the website, and it was very rudimentary website, very, very basic, which of course it was 20 years ago, so it would be. But
Yeah.
you'd read these things, and then you'd have maybe a 30-second sample or a 20-second sample, and you'd be like, well, that wasn't enough for me to really get a feel. I got to buy this to see what it's really
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
And the next thing
yeah.
you know, you own fucking 40 Hafler Trio packages.
Hafler Trio, there you go. Yeah, that's
Mine are
another
all
rabbit.
sitting up there. I can't tell you the last time I listened to them. And
Yeah,
I
I'm the
have to ask
same.
a question here. Do you own a lot of those, right? I'm assuming.
I have probably way too many Hafler Trio records. Yeah, I mean, I love them. I love them.
Did you
and
ever read the packaging? I mean, you want to talk about packaging.
See, that is a great example of what we were talking about. There's a
Yeah.
performance art element to what he does. It's not just the music, it's about the whole presentation. It's honestly, I think most of what he writes on those elaborately packaged things is probably gobbledygook that makes no sense to anyone but him.
Has to be.
But you just revel in the sumptuousness and the luxuriousness of the
Yes.
packaging, don't you?
Yeah,
Just
you open up.
folding it out. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I
you're
love
folding them out, and everything's geometrically
beautiful.
fucked, and you're like, "This is amazing," and you don't really know why. You're just
Yeah.
like, "This is somebody's thought." You're inside somebody's mind when they're
Yeah,
creating
totally.
that kind of stuff, which
Totally.
ties in with your friend, I believe, Franz de Ward, right? Wasn't he
Yeah.
Corn Plastics, or is?
Yes, he still is Corn Plastics, but he's mainly gone into book publishing now. Yeah, so in fact, he's working on a book about Andrew Mackenzie, Hafler Trio, amongst many other artists.
Really?
Yeah, but Franz is also very prolific as a musician still. Model Bow, God, he must have put out about 100 records over the last 10 years as well. Yeah, yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. What if you like, what are you listening to now in that respect? If you could just off the top of your head, can you off the top of your head go, oh yeah, I've checked in the last, let's say 2 years in the dark ambient drone sphere. Andrew, our friend Andrew Lyles, he's another guy that is super prolific and does this. Some of his stuff is incredibly droney, and then some of it is incredibly weird and wacky, and you're like, what is this? You know, it's
almost. Yeah, I love Andrew's stuff. You know, again, like you say, very prolific. I haven't got all of it, but he's amazing. I think, you know, it's in many ways it's a different aspect of the same thing. I still listen to those old guys, but my newest thing is like a bit free jazz, you know, which is in a sense also a form of noise music. It's not ambient,
right.
It's instrumental, and the pieces tend to be quite long and protracted. So when I say free jazz, I'm talking about sort of late period John Coltrane, for example.
Pharoah Sanders.
Exactly. Albums like Ascension, Pharoah Sanders, Alice Coltrane, the more spiritual side, but also the real noisy people like Peter Brotzman, Peter Brotzman, and Derek Bailey, the guitar player. So I like a lot of that stuff. It's very atonal. It's very abstract. Again, a lot of these guys are very prolific. You know, because you can knock out an album like that in an afternoon, can't you? You know, let's face it.
Well, you can. I don't know that I could, but you can.
No, but I mean, those guys.
Yeah,
I mean, I couldn't do that either. Those guys can. I like a lot of that stuff. I spent a stupid amount of money last Saturday. I spent about £500 on rare John Coltrane vinyl. So I've been enjoying listening to that all week. And in a way, it is the same thing because it's music that doesn't have any recognizable melody or harmony. And sometimes even the rhythms are very abstract. So to me, it feels closer to Ortega than it does to, say, Glenn Miller and his big band. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Or even closer to Ortega than maybe something like Dave Brubeck or something, you know, even more contemporary jazz. Because it's so abstract and so noisy and so atonal and dissonant that, again, I think it has more in common with Ortega and some of these drone artists we're talking about.
That's a great point.
I'm in that pocket at the moment. Yeah, sort of free jazz. I
had a lot of that stuff like Kule Samama.
Yeah.
What was the other? Was Ascension one of them too? I believe
Ascension was the big breakthrough. That was the one that separated the men from the boys. When that came out, that sent ripples through the jazz world.
That was a tough one. I had man, I probably had 30 or so Coltranes. I tend to I tend to go back to the ones that are a little easier listening for me these
I
days because he
understand,
can
which I
get
love also. I love also. Yeah, I love
yeah.
Supreme, obviously being a classic. The Coltrane, Africa Brass. But I'm just really enjoying those late records. Yeah. So the one you mentioned, Sunship, is another one.
Sunship. I had that.
Sunshine, the Live in Tokyo, where his version of My Favorite Things takes up 3 sides of a live record. It's an hour long. It's just, but it's so intense,
Yeah.
and he is so in the zone. And
Like maybe you'll agree with this. Coltrane was kind of like Norwegian black metal for the 60s. It was just so confrontational and anarchical.
yeah, the word I would use is he's possessed. It's like
Yeah.
when he plays, he is possessed by some demon or
Yeah.
spirit, and you're just kind of aghast at the intensity, and you're like, God, I wish I had just one iota of this, the intensity that this
Yeah.
guy's got. It's unbelievable. So it's not easy, it's difficult, it's atonal, it's dissonant, but to me, it's like a high. It's like an incredible high. Yeah.
Do you okay, so on the new album, we'll touch on that and then I'll get you out of here in 15 minutes or so. The new album, as I said, I've listened to it probably 4 times now, and I made some remarks, and I'm not going to read them verbatim, but I did kind of go through each track, and the unperson one was the one that really struck me right off the bat with the kind of initially it leads off with this is what I said. Unperson sounds like what I would envision a really bad LSD trip in a deep forest full of cicadas in a Florida swamp at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Not to steal from Tangerine Dream, not Okefenokee. This is not. It builds and builds in intensity, and it kind of has an ebb and flow to it. But the cicada thing was something that just kept coming back to me. It literally sounds like insects.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
And actually, interestingly enough, that's just a tangential ADHD moment. You never worked with Daniel Menchie, though, right? Have you directly?
No, I've met him a couple of times when I was up in Portland doing gigs. He came along to a couple of shows. No, I never worked with him, but yeah, he's another great artist that kind of spans ambient and noise music, isn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, and he's very brave in that he doesn't. If you look at what his live setup is, it's a bunch of like rods and steel rods with microphonic, microphones hooked up and various different, just household appliances and weird shit with delay pedals and all that stuff. So I had him on back in May as well too. That was my
oh great, wow.
That was my crazy dark ambient month where I had Andrew, Daniel, and I had Mr. B. Lustmore, Mr. Brian Williams.
Wow. I'm gonna have to go back and watch those. Amazing.
Yeah, they're good ones, man. They're actually really good. They're long. They're about 3 hours, which I tended to do back then. I'm scaling it back these days. But he told me about where he took, those microphonic microphones, small ones, and took a stake and drove it into an anthill with one of these microphones on it and recorded the sound of the ants just and dude, it's kind of harrowing. Like you listen to it and you're like super uncomfortable. It makes you feel super uncomfortable. Even if you didn't know what it was, even if you didn't know what the source was.
See, now that reminds me, I was having a conversation yesterday with a good friend of mine who's a real movie buff, and we were talking about The Exorcist, the original 73 Exorcist movie. And we were talking earlier about how a lot of these guys, the Foley guys, had to create these sounds from nothing. Because it wasn't like you could just reach for the sample library, to get the and some of the sounds on The Exorcist were made like, I think they recorded the sound of a bunch of angry bees or angry wasps, like buzzing around, and then they slowed it down like to about a quarter of its speed and created these incredibly really harrowing sounds by taking the sound of angry wasps, which is exactly what you're talking about there. So there's definitely an element of that in this new record too. Yeah.
So I heard that. Now I will say, and me, I'm pretty straight up. So I'm going to tell you that Apparition 3 is your copy piece. Okay. But what I mean by that is the song, it's very ethereally haunting, really appropriate to the name. but that's the hauntological track. That and the final track are the hauntological tracks.
Mm-hmm.
Very reminiscent of Boards without beats. Just
Yeah, kind of. Although I would argue that not as lush as Boards of Canada. The Apparition 3 piece is my Mellotron, put through a cassette that has been recorded over about 127 times.
wow.
So,
Okay. Like a
so
real cassette or a simulation?
well, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm going to
Okay.
plead the fifth on that. But yeah, let's just say there are ways to simulate these things these days. I
I
became
know your secrets, Wilson.
yeah, you do. I became fascinated with the idea of, rusting, degrading, basically taking something and making it sound like it's beaming in from another century. And of course, you're absolutely right. That is the philosophy of hauntological music, is to make things sound like they're beaming in from another era somehow. I
Yeah.
love that. I like to think the piece stands up in its own right, but you probably, it would be a fair comment to say that there is an influence from that strand of music. Yeah, yeah,
That's the only one that I was like, okay, I had a reference point. The rest are bass communion to me. They're bass communion songs. And I don't, I don't mean that saying, well, you ripped off Boards of Canada. It's not that. It's just that was the one point where I heard that sound and was like, okay. Now most people are going to go, well, who are Boards of Canada?
we see. I would say, do you know the Caretaker, Leyland Kirby?
No.
Ah, you should check out the Caretaker. So actually, the Caretaker, it's a little bit closer to what the Caretaker would do than what Boards of Canada would do, because I think Boards of Canada tend to make things sound quite melodic at the end of the day.
Oh yeah, they do. Sure.
Whereas the Caretaker is all about the vibe and the atmosphere and the sense of dread.
That's not that Burial guy, right? Not the Burial.
No.
Okay.
The Caretaker is this guy. What his gag? He only
I
has
know
one
that name, but I know the name, but I don't know who he is.
He's really good. He only really has one gag, but then a lot of these guys really only have one gag. And his
Yes,
gag,
they do.
he'll take sort of old jazz records from the 20s and 30s and play them really scratched up, beat up 78 RPM records and play them through this kind of cavernous reverb so that they literally sound like they are beaming in from another,
From
almost
the center of the earth, or
from
from
well,
out.
I was going to say from across time, from across
Okay,
time.
yeah.
It's a really effective little gag he's got there, and I think there's a little bit of that going on in this record too. Anyway, you should check out the Caretaker.
Oh, I definitely will. I definitely will. And speaking of him, another reference point that I don't necessarily hear here, but one of the things I've heard you say is that some of these artists kind of have a gag. They kind of have a shtick, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that's a fair assessment, I think. But I finally got to see William Basinski back in December. And Basinski's, you could kind of say he's kind of got a gag, and his gag is to take these loops and that sound like they're from another time, another world, I'm gonna fuck this word up. Anachronistic. I think I said it right.
No,
Anachronistic and sort of out of time, almost like which. Have you kept up with Williams' work at all? And like, do you own a lot of his stuff? Because I really went kind of crazy on his stuff in the last year.
I do own a lot of his work, but I can't say I've kept up either. And actually, for the very same reason that you just kind of alluded to, that I think his gag is kind of established.
Yeah.
And his gag is that he'll take an old record, like a piano recording of him playing a piano, he'll loop it, or an orchestral recording, and he'll loop it, and then he'll basically let the tape corrode. So he'll play the loop until the tape is literally shredding off. And it's a very beautiful, very haunting process. But I'm not sure I need 50 albums of that process.
It was funny watching him live because he's a very entertaining guy. Have you ever seen him?
I have. He's quite colorful character, isn't he?
Oh,
Yeah.
Very colorful, very funny. And I saw him in DC back in December. And so, of course, he alluded to the current political climate in our very fucked up country, and was just really, like you said, colorful about it. But it was kind of odd, and this ties into something bass communion related here in a sec. It was kind of odd watching a guy it's kind of like watching DJs. I have a friend who's a DJ, and he's a really good DJ, and I often be like, yeah, dude, but it's not like picking one of these up and playing, man. It's, he's like, nah, that's not true, dude. Like, that's not true. I'm working levers and mixing sound and turntables and whatnot. So that now in Williams' case, it's a lot of manipulation of an actual reel to reel with a laptop.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, you can't just sit there and start headbanging.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, you know what I mean? You're more immersed in the overall sort of feel of it. How you've not done a lot of Bass Communion live performances, but you just did one, right, with Franz, I believe, right?
Yeah, and the reason I invited France is for that very reason, that I thought it was going to be very boring just watching me behind a laptop, because unfortunately a lot of the music is essentially about processing sound through DSPs. So that doesn't make for the most visually entertaining concert. That's kind of inherent in a lot of these shows, which is why a lot of these guys end up using a lot of visuals and that kind of stuff to create a visual kind of focal point.
Or they don't tour like boards.
Yeah. So there isn't a great deal of performance aspect to what I do. I did it with France. Yeah, I mean, it's not something I could imagine doing a lot, but once in every now. I mean, I think the whole thing about the William Basinski thing, coming back to William Basinski, obviously the whole thing about his most famous piece, Disintegration Loops, is you set up the process, and this goes back to John Cage. You set up the process, and then the process essentially performs itself.
Yeah, it creates the byproduct, the end product. Yeah.
And that was something that Eno did. It was something that John Cage did. So you create a set of parameters. So you set up this setup, and then you allow Lamont Young, you allow the performance to play itself. And so that's not the most visually entertaining thing, is it? Let's face it.
Did you ever get to see Nurse with Wound?
I've never seen Nurse. No, obviously.
Yeah, neither have I. And he's rarely played the States. And I guess he's got Colin. Colin is with him live, and I believe Andrew. Yeah.
No, I've never had the pleasure of seeing Stephen play live. But still a big fan of the records.
Have you met Stephen?
I've talked to him on the phone a few times. I've not met him. No, he's quite reclusive. He's out in Ireland. Middle of nowhere. But he's another one that's become very prolific the last few years. Puts out so many records, and
impossible.
Can't say I've kept up with them all, no, but they tend to be quite diverse and quite different. So that's good. Yeah.
Some of his stuff is too out there for me, but then, some of the classics like Soliloquy or
that's a seminal. Yeah, I mean, you talk about the Year Zero records,
Yeah.
So that would be one of them, I think.
I think also, Chance obviously is one of those music concrete like classics that you don't want to listen to, but you can't not listen to it once you start listening to it. But like, I think my favorite Nurse thing would probably be, and I'm sure it, Funeral Music for Perez Prado.
Oh, beautiful. Absolutely.
Man, that is just one of the most hauntingly
so simple. But
just
I agree.
gorgeous.
And that's David Organon performing whatever the instrument is.
Was it really? I didn't know.
So that's all based on it. So the full 35-minute version or whatever it is just a loop of David Jackman playing. I forget what the instrument is now, some kind of flute or pipe. Yeah. No, I'm with you. That's a beautiful piece. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
Are there any like recent things that you would recommend people go check out other than the one that you told me about, The Caretaker? The more you say that, the more I'm starting to think I do know that, but I don't know it. You know what I mean? Like, I know you were really into the Max
Richter. Yeah, I mean that's more sort of neoclassical. He's one of those sort of new generation of classical composers that have grown up with electronic music. So in that category, I would include Niels Frahm, also and Johan Johansson. A lot of these guys ended up doing soundtrack music. Max Richter, but his most famous piece, and I believe now the most streamed piece of classical music in history, is his 8-hour piece Sleep.
Yeah,
which is intended to be listened to whilst unconscious. So
while you're in REM sleep. Yeah.
Even my kids listen to that. So that's
do they really?
that's how much that piece has crossed over to a mainstream audience. Yeah, because there's an element now of music being music. I think the role of music has changed a lot in society since you and I started listening to music when we were kids. The
Yeah.
role of music for a lot of people now is as a kind of mood, sort of to put them in a particular, or to suit a particular context, or an occasion in their life. So when they're meditating, when they're having coffee, when they're doing yoga, when they're trying to sleep, when they feel anxious.
Right.
And a lot of these Spotify playlists that rack up billions and billions of hits and billions of streams are playlists like music for coffee break, music for
Yeah.
yoga, music for insomniacs.
Yes.
And that's where a lot of these guys, really hit the target.
It's that
Uh,
ASMR thing,
yeah,
that
it's an aspect of
just
that. Yeah,
disconnecting. Even you and I, we're elderly gentlemen. We're not old, but we're elderly gentlemen. We're approaching that big 60. And not that it's any different than the big 50 or the big 40, but our world, I think you'd agree, is at least perceptually far more aggressive in the lifestyles that we lead. In other words,
yeah,
we're constantly being pulled in 18 different
yeah.
directions, whether
Yes.
it be our physical schedules of get the kids to soccer practice and get that kind of stuff, or it's just the nonstop barrage of information coming at us. And
Yes.
so the ASMR and that kind of stuff, it makes perfect sense that people want to go, man, I need a way to disconnect without taking drugs or without,
Yeah.
and a lot of people are doing that as well too. But you get my point that it's like people need a way to disconnect. And sometimes throwing on the latest Opeth or even the latest Porcupine Tree or even the latest Steven Wilson isn't a way to completely disconnect, but putting on a Bass Communion album, the mellower stuff, not the more abrasive stuff, is a way to kind of just go inside and go, man, I just need space. And this allows that to happen.
Completely. I think a lot of this kind of music now, it's almost the equivalent of, and I've always talked about ambient music in this way anyway, but I think it's more relevant than ever now. It's almost like filling a room with a perfume. It's creating a feeling and an atmosphere in the room that makes you feel less stressed by all the things you've just mentioned. And also, obviously, what goes along with what you've just talked about is the fact that we don't have the time anymore to engage deeply. I find it very difficult to engage deeply with any music that has song structures or vocals or lyrics, simply because I always find I'm multitasking these days, because I have to, just to get through all the shit I need to do. I have to multitask, and I can't be listening to singing when I'm trying to reply to emails or doing online interviews or whatever it is I'm doing. So I find that this kind of music that just kind of sits there in the room and creates a perfume in the room, and that's what this. I mean, I don't know about you, Jeff, but I go to sleep every night with this kind of thing. Do you know this app, the White Noise app?
Oh, okay. So
that's rain. Every night I go to sleep with the sound of rain, but you can have crashing waves. I have it on all night long. And
you know what my white noise is?
What?
It's this. The thing that's doing that to my lovely lot.
The
fan. I cannot sleep without a fan. Stephen, I went to Maryland Death Fest for the first time. I know you're like, Maryland Death Fest? You went to Maryland? I went to Maryland Death Fest last week, and I got to see some of the, the seminal bands that I never would have been able to see anywhere. But my buddy that I room with, he's a buddy from Colorado. I'm like, dude, I got to tell you straight up. If we're rooming in the same room, I'm bringing my box fan. He's like, bro, that's awesome, because I sleep with a fan too. I'm like,
oh, wow, there you go.
Wait, what the fuck? Like 20 years ago, nobody I knew slept with a fan.
There you go. Oscillating fan is one of the options on that app. There you go.
Yeah.
You don't even need the real fan. You've got it on the phone now.
And it speaks to something, that thing that we talked about, anxiety. I've always dealt with very bad anxiety issues. Part of the reason why I probably haven't been as prolific musically as I'd like to be is because I'm afraid that if I put it out there, people are going to go, oh, but you should go do this or you should go do that. And I'd be like, I just don't, I don't know how that would go. But anyway, um, just the accelerated rate at which we live anymore, it feels like it just feels so different from the 1970s. I don't know why. Maybe I'm fooling myself that it.
Well, I think I can tell you why. Because we live in a world now of where the world is a very small place because of the internet and because of social media.
Yes.
And so I think when we were growing up, we were very disconnected from the outside world. We were very aware of
Perfect.
our own immediate environment, our local library, our local record store, our friends. And now we're constantly aware of everything, whether it's the
Yes.
war in Israel, the war in Ukraine, what's going on in Mexico, what's going on in France, what's going on in India. We're constantly stressed by all this information. And so, and also being a musician these days means everything you do, every creative gesture you make, everything you say is immediately analyzed and criticized
By everyone.
by somebody. Well, by
Yeah.
somebody. Some people
Yeah.
will agree with you, some will disagree with you. So
Yeah.
you get constant feedback. So you can no longer really a lot of people don't even trust their own instincts anymore. And
Yeah.
it's very sad. It's very sad. So this is kind of in a way why I've developed this thick skin where I really relish upsetting my fans, because I think if I'm upsetting my fans, then I'm doing something right. At least I'm changing. I'm moving forward.
That.
But it's a tough thing. You have to really develop it. Most people are not equipped for that, I have to say.
Early on though, Steve, if you remember, early on, you weren't initially.
Absolutely.
You would read the comments and you'd respond if it was somebody being a total
Yeah.
fucking
Totally.
dickhead.
Yeah.
And then you couldn't win in that
You
argument
cannot
because
win. You
someone
cannot
would
win.
come in and go, "Well, Steve's just being a pretentious fuck. He's the
Exactly.
rock star, blah blah
Yeah.
blah." And it's like, yeah, but you don't even fucking know that dude. You have no clue what he's dealing with on a daily basis. And I remember that, and I remember thinking, there's a specific instance. There was a critic in Israel. Do you remember that?
I don't know.
Okay, there was a guy. He had a label. I'll just stop there. But he really was uncool in some of the things he said. We can talk about it offline.
Mm.
But he was really uncool. And I remember that being sort of a breaking point for you when there was finally finally a website. You had a website, but PT didn't actually have a website back then.
Right.
Except for Serge's website and Didier's website. Those were the two first ones. But then when you started to pick up steam, particularly with the Lava thing, when Lava signed you, there was just a barrage of just fucking stupid shit. And you're like, you guys don't even know who this guy is. And I remember you finally getting to a point where you were like, I can't look at this stuff ever again. Or do you still stay that way? Or now have you developed a thick enough skin?
No, I don't. I have a policy. I do not read anything. I do not read anything. I don't read. If I post things on Instagram, I just don't read the comments, because the problem is that basically my web guy does, and if there's something important, he will relay it to me.
Right.
But the problem is, obviously, a lot of people know that I'm married. My wife is Israeli as well, so that's a whole other can of worms that's opened up.
Yeah.
So the problem is that human nature is such that 99 people tell you that they really like what you do. One person tells you that they think you suck, you're an asshole, you're pretentious. That is the one you fixate on.
That's the one you remember. Yeah.
It's the same a bit. It's the same being on stage. And also I had this thing on stage. If there's one person in the audience that looks like they're bored or yawning their way through the show, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that the rest of the crowd are going mental. This fucking show is for you.
This guy right there, you fucker.
Right, and it's human nature.
Yeah.
It's human nature to take the negative things very personally and kind of ignore all the positive stuff going on. And I'm as guilty as that of anyone. So I don't read anything. I don't read reviews. I don't read even the good ones, because the funny thing is, even the good reviews, there'll be something in it that will annoy me. it'll be like some comparison to a band I don't really like.
He said that's not a real piano. It is a real piano, you
exactly.
fuck.
Well, how dare they compare me to Coldplay?
How dare that asshole say that sounds like Boards of Canada? I can't believe that guy.
See, that I'll accept, because I like Boards of Canada and I like you. But and I know you, but the problem is that there's a lot of people, you know, there's a lot of people out there that are armchair critics now. They criticize, and they're negative, and they obviously have a lot of hate, and they have an agenda, and they lash out at people that they like. That's the irony of the thing.
I did that. I did that once.
Like.
I did that once. I did that once with you. I did.
Did you? Okay.
I was pretty fucking dickish about the future bites. But here's what I said.
See, I
really don't like. I'm just going to tell you straight up. I said I really don't like this album. It sounds like Steve's just kind of treading the same ground. But this is what I said. I listened to every track, including the bonus tracks, all the B-sides and all that stuff. I said, man, if he would have used that track and this track and this track and this track, I would have given this an album a 10 out of 10. So I was kind of there. I just wasn't there with the
okay, with the tracks I selected. Okay.
Maybe I'll come around. I don't know. But
no, you know, and listen, there's nothing. This is the whole thing. This is the crux of the matter. It's not your fault. You're not in the wrong by not liking the record.
Right.
I'm not in the wrong making the record.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is the problem I have, is when a fan will try and tell me I've made a mistake by making a record that they don't like.
Oh, I never said that. I never said you made a mistake.
You didn't. But plenty of people do.
In fact, interestingly enough, I've defended, not that I have to, but like when we did the deep dive on your solo material, you know, one of the guys was like, you know, I don't know, Steve just seems to have this, I don't know, he seems to be like sort of arrogant now. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? Well, I don't know, he just seems to like be full of himself. I'm like, dude, the guy makes a lot of world-renowned records. He's produced world-renowned records. He kind of has the right to at least know that he trusts his instincts. And if that comes across as, I see what you do as coming across as confident, not as arrogance. But I know you, so maybe that's the differing thing. You know what I mean?
I mean, obviously that's not the first time I've been accused of being arrogant. I think that there's a lot of people out there that make their mind up about me based on what they read on the internet. I can be very bullish about what I do, and part of it is a defense mechanism, because actually I always expect people to dislike what I do, and I'm always surprised when they like it. Does that make sense?
Wild. Yeah, that's wild though.
So at this
point still.
Yeah, but I don't think I'm unusual. I don't think I'm unusual in that. I think this is something that a lot of musicians, good, average, bad, it doesn't matter whether you're good. I think a lot of musicians suffer from this, that they're almost surprised when people like what they do. I've met a few people that are the opposite, that are surprised when people don't like what they do, but they are the exceptions. I can tell you that Michael from Opeth is always stunned that people like what he does. He said, "Well, I'm just making music I like, man. I can't believe anyone likes it." In that very kind of self-deprecating Swedish way that they have. But I totally get that. I'm always amazed. I'm amazed that I have an audience. I'm amazed that people sometimes describe me as some kind of visionary. I don't, because I'm still a fan myself.
But right there though is a key. That's the key thing right there. That's kind of that's the antithesis of being arrogant in a weird way. You get what I'm saying? In other words, to sit there and go, I don't have any expectation that somebody's going to like this. Like, why would they like this? And I'm shocked when they do. That's kind of the opposite of being arrogant.
Well, and also, I mean, that's interesting because people could accuse you of being arrogant because you're constantly changing your music and constantly confronting your expectations of it. Or let's just say you're not giving them what they want. So that is arrogant. And then I would say to those people, why does anyone become a musician in the first place? And ask themselves that question, and then just think about that for a minute. Why would anyone become a musician in the first place? Is it to please other people? No.
Please yourself.
That's an entertainer. That's not the same as a musician.
Right.
And I think I've always made that distinction. And partly the reason I've made that distinction is because the artists that I admire the most I do sense have this kind of I'm doing it for me thing. And that could be Richard James,
Miles Davis.
Miles Davis, John
Yeah.
Coltrane.
Yeah.
I'm not comparing myself to any of those visionaries. Please don't give me the hate. But there is something. There's something.
Blabbermouth. Stephen Wilson says, "I'm
Yeah.
like John Coltrane."
Exactly. I'm the 21st century Miles Davis. No.
Yeah.
Somebody accused me of saying. So I did read somewhere around the time of Future Bites. Somebody said Stephen Wilson suddenly thinks he's David Bowie. No, I don't.
You've always said they're untouchable guys. He's one
I
of
love
those,
David Bowie, and
yeah,
I admire the fact that he constantly reinvented himself.
which is
And
what you've done a lot.
I tried, and I like going back to the earlier part of our conversation. I accept that part of the contract of reinventing yourself, that part of the contract you have with your fans, some of them will be disappointed with with the direction. You were disappointed with Future Bites. I love that record. There are some people who think it's my best record. Honestly, there are.
But I never bailed out, though. I didn't bail out.
No, you didn't. But I can totally understand. It's the most pop orientated album I've ever made. And I can understand that wouldn't resonate very well with people who come from the prog metal, got into Porcupine Tree. They would have a hard time with Future Bites. I get that. But I love the fact that it's part of my catalogue. And I think I always see my catalogue as this trajectory that will unfold over a period of years, and every record will have a reason to be in that discography, if that makes sense.
Just to be clear, though, I think
Yeah.
ABBA, XTC. These are some of the Beatles. These are some of my favorite. Beach Boys. These are foundational bands for guys like you and I.
No, I know you like pop, Jeff. I'm not saying you don't like pop. Yeah.
So it just, I don't know. I have to go back to the record. I promise you I will. I promise you I will. I'm not going to promise you I'll like it. I'm just saying, I promise you I'll go back and kind of, that hit me at a rough time. It hit the world at a rough time, obviously. We're all isolated, and we're all kind of that whole thing that we talked about being barraged by the smallness of the world now. This, when we were in our teens running around in the 70s, man, we didn't think about what was going on in OPEC and gas prices and Russia and all that. We didn't really think, well, we knew about Russia being that, that Cold War thing, but we just didn't think about those things. We didn't think about, and now, recently, we didn't think about things like the politics of masking and not masking and jab or no jab and all this bullshit that we're in a constant state of attack is what I feel like. And music should give us that respite to get away from that as much as possible, right?
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I did say at the time that I think the Future Bites came out at the worst possible time in history, because this was an album that was deliberately creating a kind of barrier between the person that created the music and the audience. So it was like marketing a record as a product, almost as you market sneakers or some kind of other commercial brand. And it was the timing was awful, because people wanted in COVID was to feel connected.
Yes.
So it was just bad timing. But it is it is the most controversial record in my catalog, but I'm so happy it's in the discography, because it stands as something unique in my discography.
Well, okay. So when you read something like, if you go on Rate Your Music, do you ever use Rate Your Music ever? You ever look at that?
I know of it, but I would
kind of a point system for rating albums. You'll find, not shockingly, that the Future Bites, and I don't want to turn this into the Future Bites sucks interview. That's not what this is. But that is your least liked album. And there are juxtaposing opinions of, like you said, I love this album. It's pure pop. It's magical. And then there's other people who are like, this has been done before, and who does Wilson think he's kidding, and that kind of stuff. And that kind of lends back to what we talked about with the state of being an artist is you have to do this for you, because if you do it for anyone else, it's disingenuous to the audience. It's disingenuous to the craft. There's no point in just, and I find this all the time, particularly in metal. Metal guys are super open, right? But they never quite want to hear, it's like, oh, another Opeth Prague album. Do we have to have that again? Where's the death screaming vocals? But back then, if you make the same fucking album, you're just repeating yourself. But If you deviate a little bit, oh, who does he think he is, or who does Michael think he is? You see what I mean? That dilemma.
Yeah, there is an irony there. I mean, like you said, if somebody would say, "Who does Wilson think he is?" This stuff's been done so many times before. But metal, for example, is incredibly generic and
It is.
incredibly limiting as a musical vocabulary. Whereas pop doesn't have to be. And I think, for whatever its faults might be, Future Bites is quite an inventive pop record. The point is, it's a pop record, and it's been made by an artist that people maybe think of as someone that works in prog rock or prog metal. And I totally get that. And that's the bit that I embrace, in a way, as being not necessarily a bad thing. But anyway, it's not you're not doing anything wrong by
Sorry
not
about
liking
that.
that record, just in the same way that I'm not doing anything wrong by making that record.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it's it's kind of moot, really.
It
isn't
is funny. I mean, somebody down, and I'm going to get to a couple comments and get you out of here. Again, just to reiterate, the itself of itself.
Yeah.
What was in the title? I think I saw you kind of be like, it just is what it is. I guess
It's
that's
what it
what.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the meaning, really. It just I was thinking of a title for it, and I just thought, well, what kind of music is it? How do you describe this music? And the ultimate answer to that is you don't. It just is. It is what it is.
Is what it is.
I don't know what it is. I don't honestly know what it is. It's not ambient because it's too abrasive to be. It's not drone because there's not a lot of drones going on. It's noise, but it's beautiful at the same time. I don't know. So that was kind of what we thought, myself and the record label. We discussed the possible titles, and that just seemed the right one for it. Yeah.
Do you play that stuff for your wife and your kids and have them go? Do they go, or do they actually go? Oh, this is.
Well,
cool,
they hear me doing it. Well, funny enough, my eldest stepdaughter Yali, she's kind of grown up in a house. All her friends are listening to Taylor Swift and
Right.
and Billie Eilish, and she loves that stuff too. But at the same time, I like to think that when she gets older, she's not going to be that kid or that grown up that when she hears John Coltrane or when she hears Merzbow,
Right.
is going to say, huh, what the fuck's that? That's not music. She's going to say, oh yes, I know that. I grew up hearing that music. That is all part of that's all part of the music, the wide expanse of an eclecticism that exists within this world of music. So she's not going to be that person that's going to find that incredibly alien and off-putting. So they hear it, put it that way. Yeah.
I think I hear you completely, because one of the I guess proudest moments of my life. Do you remember my kids? Do you remember Maddie?
I do. Yeah, they must be all grown up now.
Do
Yeah.
you remember Tristan? Yeah, I mean Tristan. That's a tricky one. I don't know if I told you about that. We'll have to talk afterwards about that. But Maddie is kind of my music. Tristan is the guitar player and really sometimes smokes my ass. And I've gotten way better than I was, way better. But she's pushed me, okay? But Maddie has become a really, really accomplished guitarist and pianist, self-taught. And man, Steve, you got to hear her voice. You got to hear her voice. Unbelievably haunting in that. Do you remember Marissa Nadler?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
So very Marissa Nadler-esque. And
Oh.
yeah, and I actually had Marissa on 2 years ago, I think it was, for a long, poor girl, man. She was like, pretty done by the time we finished. But we went through her history and catalog, and I brought Maddie on, actually. Wow. Maddie just hit me up a few minutes ago, and she's like, oh, Dad, I'm watching you with Steve. So cool. And she loves so many aspects of the music that you do, and, Floyd, and just imparting those things to her, Marissa Nadler and Mazzy Star, and, some of these cool artists that I've discovered either from you or from just being a constant forager, constantly foraging. That's a cool thing, to leave that legacy, that inquisitiveness, that.
Yes, I think so.
You know what I'm trying to say here, and not.
No, absolutely. Just to engender an open mind, just to engender them having an open mind, to not sort of immediately be defensive when they hear something they don't understand or see or read or whatever it is, to experience something that doesn't immediately compute with their experience, but not to immediately reject it and be negative about it. Because let's face it, that's what 90% of the internet is.
Yeah. Oh man, it's
Sadly.
unbelievable. Unbelievable. I've been
So,
very
yeah.
fortunate thus far that, I haven't had too many people come at me because I'm pretty combative. So it's like if somebody fucks with me, I'm like, but I learned like you did that the minute you start to retaliate, it just escalates and escalates and escalates. And
Yeah, these people don't want to hear, they don't want to hear the truth.
or they
They
don't want to hear any rational
They don't want to hear any
explanation
rational,
for
so they don't want
like
to hear an alternate, something that kind of doesn't chime with their perspective on the world.
perspective.
They don't want to hear it. So it's pointless. So you just walk away, or you don't read it in the first place. You don't
Yeah.
engage with it. It's one of the reasons I started as a solo artist in a way, is because it's amazing being in a band. Don't get me wrong. I love being in a band, but being in a band, you all have to find your common ground.
Common ground. Yeah.
Now, by definition, your common ground is going to be a very small little area.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I'm very proud of what PT have done, but PT have a sound and an identity, and it will never change that much because it is this little part in the middle of the Venn diagram where our personalities kind of cross over. And that's the bit we all agree. This is what we're going to do. And what I love about being a solo artist is being able to, a bit like Bowie, again, I'm not comparing myself to Bowie. Please don't give me the hate. This is what I loved about Bowie. Bowie being a solo artist, I'm going to do my big pop record now. Now I'm going to do my really weird experimental album and bring Brian Eno in, and we're going to do a big concept record.
Outside, right? Outside?
Yeah, outside. Now I'm going to do my singer-songwriter record. Now I'm going to do my punk rock record. Now I'm going to form
Philly
a grunge
soul.
band.
Philly soul, right. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the beauty of being a solo artist. And this is where the Future Bites, sorry to keep coming back to the Future Bites, but it is kind of this lightning rod in my catalogue for controversy. This is where the Future Bites comes in. That was my pop record. That was my direct electronic pop record.
Yeah.
Probably never going to make another one like that again. My next record is a big prog epic with 2 25-minute long tracks on it.
Uh-oh. I could see it now. The king of prog has returned.
Yeah. Steven Wilson has finally realized the error of his ways. No, if I read that, I will be angry, because the record after that will be something completely different again. But you take my point. It's always, I think for me, it's always about trying to add something to this discography that wasn't there before. A pop record, a prog rock record, an 80s influence record, a 70s influence record, whatever it is, a jazz, a shoegazer influence record. These are all things that exist in my catalogue. And that's why I think I'm most proud of my solo work more than the band, because the band essentially is all aspects of the same thing.
Sure.
Great. Love it. I'm really proud of it. But I'm more proud of my solo catalogue because each album is like, this is my that record. This is my this record. And the next record,
although I think you might agree with me here. I think that the Harmony Codex was kind of a cool amalgam of everything that you do well. There is a pop song or two. There is an almost a weird, funky, no manish type song. There's, it's a little bit of there's some electronic cool stuff like
hip hop, cosmic, ambient music. Yeah, you're right. It's a bit of everything on that record. Yeah, very proud of that record.
I'm gonna hit some comments and let you go. Because I did ask people to throw some stuff in here as it's live. Tim, my buddy Tim, I blew it. I forgot the catchphrase. We'll do it at the end. Tim gave me a catchphrase for my show, and I keep forgetting to use it. So apologize, sir. Tim asks, how was listening to avant-garde music, or how has enhanced your creative and playing style? I'm not sure. Has it really?
Well, I think it has, but it's kind of a difficult thing it's an intangible.
Nebulous.
Because I always say that your input inevitably will affect your output. And that applies to the movies you watch, the books you read, the news you see, the people you meet, the friends you make, and of course, the music you listen to. Now, I listen to a lot of free jazz right now. Are you going to hear free jazz on my next album? No, you're not going to hear free jazz. but perhaps there's something
element
of the free spirit, or the uncompromising aspect of it. I think that's probably the answer to the question. It's the uncompromising nature of the avant-garde. It kind of exists only for itself. And that, I think, is a big part of my musical personality. Yeah.
My buddy Mean Metal Mike asks, who are your favorite bassists that have influenced your style? That's actually an interesting question.
It's a good question because I play bass on this new record.
Yeah.
That's a really good question. Bass, do I listen to? Yeah, bass players.
You predominantly, if I'm not incorrect, you predominantly play with a plectrum, right? With a pick.
I do, yeah. And I bought this to make this new record I'm making with these 2 long tracks. I bought this beautiful 60s Baldwin bass. And I bought it, Baldwin Burns bass. I bought it because it's the bass that was played on an album. I don't know if you're familiar with this album, Jeff, by Serge Gainsbourg called Histoire Melody Nelson.
Yeah.
That record,
cool stuff.
That bass sound, it was played by this guy called Dave Richmond, who's a classic English session player.
Okay.
And I heard it and I found out he was playing this Baldwin bass, and I bought one off the internet that apparently used to belong to Jack Bruce. I don't know if it's true or not, but I like the idea that maybe
you got in before Getty did on that. Holy shit!
I'm going to show it to you.
Let me see that. I don't even know what they are. I've never heard of them.
I think he only made about
look at that thing.
I think only about 20 of these were made, and you'll see that you can't actually play it where you would normally play because they've got these bars. So you end up having to play it here,
back to the bridge, so you get that chimey.
It has a really percussive, almost like a pluck sound.
Is that the original pickups?
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, I bought it secondhand, so I don't know, but I think it's all original. Yeah,
I've never heard of one of those.
Yeah, me neither. Until I found out this is what that guy Dave Richmond played.
Are you still playing the gold PRS? Is that your usual go-to, or do you go to the?
No, it's all this.
That's a 22, right? 22 or 24? Oh, the telly. That's right.
It's all this these days. It's still plugged in. It's all this one these days. Telly.
Is that a relic one or?
It's a relic one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'd love to say it was an original 63, but no, it's a relic 63. But it sounds phenomenal. I love that.
I need to look into a telly. I've only played them a couple times. Not my main one now. I love this, but everybody hates this guitar. But I love the Cadillacs, the Dean.
Oh, look at that! That's beautiful.
I just love that. That giant headstock. Everybody's like, oh, that headstock looks like shit. I'm like, dude, this is a killer guitar. It's got the licensed Floyd, PRS.
That's very space age, very George Clinton.
Spectre bass. Don't you have a Spectre, or am I imagining?
I play a lot of Spectre on the new record as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't answered the question. I don't really know. I mean, who do I like as bass players? It's a really good question.
Roger Waters.
I'd love to say I have a good answer for you. No,
he's not really known as a great.
Well, no, I mean, he did what was needed for that band, but I wouldn't say, do you know there's a guy that's just passed away that was the bass player in Gentle Giant, Ray Shulman, an absolute sweet guy.
Yeah.
What a fantastically inventive player as well as a bass player. Yeah, I really like him. Yeah, but I mean, because I'm an 80s boy, I like a lot of the 80s. Mick Karn, there you go.
Oh God,
yeah. And
that guy Beggs, he's pretty good. That
Beggs,
yeah, right.
Hooky from New Order. There's some great bass players in the 80s. Yeah.
So my buddy Tom Draper, once but no longer in the band Spirit Adrift, a monstrous guitar player, by the way, scary good. And huge fan. He says, I heard one of your songs unexpectedly on a German TV show called Nicht Nachmachen. I don't know. Don't try this at home premise with lots of comedic household destructions. He wanted to know. He sent that to me last night or night before. He's like, I wonder if Steven knows or licensed this.
No.
I'll send you the link.
Okay.
I'll send you the link to it.
That's news to me.
He's also asking, what are some of your favorite instances of hearing your music and other people's creations outside of its originally intended context? So remixes, I'm assuming, or are we talking? I'm not sure what you mean by that, Tom. Maybe
it doesn't happen to me often. I mean, if he's talking about things like people covering my songs or sampling, I mean, I'm not aware of it happening very often. I think, you know, even for me to hear my music on the radio is such a surreal
I
thing
was
because
going to just ask that. Has that happened a lot?
no, not a lot. Not a lot. So when
Hmm.
it does happen, it's kind of surreal. You know, imagine if you're Sting, you know, you must be so blasé. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, there's Roxanne on the radio again, or
Yeah.
everybody's on the radio again.
Yeah.
It's so unusual for me to hear anything on the radio that it's almost surreal. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in a weird way, Stephen, in a strange way, and maybe you'll agree with this, maybe you won't, but you and I might have been born maybe about 7 to 8 years too late in a weird way, because I often think, man, if I had been not 3 years old or 4 years old and been 17 or 18, I'd have been trekking, particularly from Pennsylvania. I'd have been going to Woodstock. I would have been going
Mm,
to Monterey Pop, or I would have been doing these things. Like I said, I went to Maryland Death Fest for
mm.
7 days or 5 days last week. Um, I think your music really would have been pretty huge in the 70s and 80s, like arena style, which you kind of achieved that with PT now after the fact. Because,
Mm,
I saw you at Radio City and it was huge.
mm,
But prior to that, when you guys were headlining yourself, you weren't doing 15,000 like you did in Chile or something like
mm.
that. So I remember when you did come back, seeing that, I was like, what the fuck happened here? Like the last gig I was at in Virginia, when you guys wrapped up the incident, there might have been 1,000 people, maybe
Well,
1,200.
but yeah, but I mean, I still do shows like that. I mean, PT, even
Oh,
PT
I
on
know.
that, you know, we did play 15,000 in Santiago and in Mexico, but we still played to like 800 people in Minneapolis, you know.
Yeah.
So for all the fact that for all the, you know, the PT word has spread during our absence, we're still a cult band. We're still, and
Okay.
but you're absolutely right. And I agree with your sentiment of what you're saying here is that I think if we had come out 10 years before or 20 years before, if we'd come out of the crucible of, you know, late 60s art pop, progressive pop, experimental rock, we could have been up there with all of those other acts. But, you know, um, I, I'm pretty happy on balance that I came out when I did, because I think if I was starting now,
Now, yeah.
I have no idea how I'd even get a foothold in the industry. I have
I don't
no,
know how anybody does.
I
It's
don't know how anyone does. Yeah.
nobody's buying albums except for old guys like you and me, or older guys, and some younger kids. The reemergence of the vinyl thing, which even I have fallen prey to, and I swore I wasn't going to, but I did.
Mm, mm.
I finally bought my first turntable after like 25 years, and have spent an obscene amount of money in the last
Fun,
6 or
right? It's fun. Yeah, yeah.
and records are going for ridiculous amounts of money
Yeah,
now, which they're doing it again. They're
mhm.
pushing the but anyway, that's a whole different topic. But yeah, I think that songs from Stupid Dream and Lightbulb Sun, and of course, the bigger albums, Dead
Well,
Wings and Absentia,
yeah, Blackest Eyes, Lazarus, Sound of Music.
massive radio hit 10
I,
years before that.
I think another era they probably would have been. Yeah.
Are you glad to some
No,
extent?
no, I would have loved for them to have been hits.
You'd love to be
Obviously,
a millionaire?
yeah. Listen, I don't care about money, but
Yeah.
this goes back to what we were saying earlier. Everyone loves to see themselves reflected back in the mirror of
And,
success.
and that's what ties it all together is
Yeah,
you said being an artist, sharing what you're creating that you're jazzed up about, that you're excited about. It's hard not to want to share that and just get some feedback of some
yeah.
sort, and you hope it's good. You hope
And
it's
that's
good.
and that's the great irony and the great paradox of being creative is you to be truly an artist, you have to have allegiance to only one person, yourself. But you also, to be an artist and to be able to continue to be an artist and to be a professional artist, you have to have an audience as well. It's this really fucked up kind of contradiction and paradox that art has to be selfish, but at the same time, it has to have an audience. Otherwise, you can't keep on doing it.
Well,
And
yeah, exactly.
somehow I've managed to walk that tightrope. And I don't underestimate how privileged I am to be able to say that, because there's a lot of people that are very talented, more talented than me, that have been unable to get a foothold in the industry that would enable them to to continue to do what they like doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't. So for all my regrets that I wasn't born 10 years earlier, I wasn't part of the 80s or part of the 70s, I can't complain. I can't complain, Jeff. I do what the fuck I want. And actually, I've made a pretty good living from it.
Dude, you've done very well. I mean, I look back to when we first met in '99, you're opening for Gong, and
Christ. Yeah.
it was an interesting. You're on the Jesus bus. I always bring up the Jesus bus.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, and you know, I know you know this feeling. The irony is that when we discover an artist, like I discovered you through Fish, through your association with working with Fish on Sunsets, you want to keep that band all to yourself. You want to, you really don't, you want them to be successful, but at the same point in time, you're like, yeah, but if they're really big, everybody will know about it. And it won't be my thing anymore. Or me and my group of friends where it's like, dude, did you check out the latest, Porcupine Trees song or whatever? You know what I mean? It's a weird duality and dichotomy of the whole situation. And I went to see, are you familiar with the band Big Wreck?
I'm not, no.
Canadian band, a guy named Ian Thornley.
I don't know them, no.
Absolutely jaw-dropping guitarist, but not a wank guy like you particularly don't like. He's fucking, oh my God, he's amazing. I think you'd like their music. They were kind of a quasi early sort of grunge band, but not really. They were a little bit more pop orientated. But so he got to the last song of the night 2 nights ago, and he said, man, I just, and there might have been 160 people, 200 max at this show, little tiny venue I'd never even heard of in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which you played before, but not the nice place you played. This was a little arts center, and the crowd was amazing, like just stunningly loud and just into it. And he said, guys, I just want to thank you. You guys, like all the cheering, you don't know what that means. You don't really fully understand what that means. I've been doing this for he's been doing it about 30 years too, like early 90s. And he's like, I've been doing this a long time, and that never gets old. And the reason I keep doing it is because of people like you. And then he hesitated and said, but I'm not going to lie, if I became a millionaire, I'd say, fuck it. And it was just such a perfect thing. And I know he was kidding.
Yeah.
But it was just that sentiment of, as the artist, you're always riding that fine line between, if I repeat myself because I did something super successful, that's exactly what they're going to always expect.
Yeah.
And they're always going to want it. And creatively, what's that going to do for me ultimately?
And I think that's part of why I think some fans get so upset when I make, like Permeating was a very good example. Wasn't on the Future Bites, was on the previous record. It was my homage to ABBA almost. It was very joyous pop. And I think people got more upset with the idea that I maybe wanted to be a big pop star, successful pop musician, than with the song itself. So I think people sometimes question my motives for doing it. But then those people obviously didn't know much about me, because I've been raving about ABBA since 1996.
You covered them, for fuck's sake, on the very first.
So I've always been
second cover version.
Yeah, I mean, I've been very, very vocal about my love of pop and growing up with, great pop, ABBA, Carpenters, Bee Gees. I've been very clear about that love of that pure pop from the beginning. But again, I think because people knew me as a progressive rock artist, something didn't chime right with them. And I found myself having to explain myself.
Yeah.
Again,
always. And I was even around for some of those things, where you'd be like, oh, fuck, I got to do this again. It's like, it probably did become somewhat to a point. Was that some of the reason that maybe Porcupine Tree went away to a degree where you felt like maybe you had run up against the wall to an extent, as far as
I think Porcupine Tree had a sound, and it was very hard to, that's the beauty, like I said earlier before, being a solo artist, you can just do that whenever you want. You're on this road, you know what, I think I'm going to go off on this turning here.
And no one's going to tell you no.
No one's going to say no, but I don't want to go that way. I want us to
Yeah.
carry on this way.
Yeah.
And
You had that.
that's the beautiful thing about being in a band, but it's also the downside of being in a band.
Yeah.
So to me, I have the best of both worlds because I have the band and I have my solo thing too. Anyway, Jeff, I think I better go because my wife.
I know you got to go.
My
one
wife's
quick wrap up, real quick. So you got the solo album coming out in 25.
early next year.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the new bass. Do you envision doing any other live things with the bass communion thing?
I'm always open to invitations. I mean, I think if somebody came to me, and said, "Oh, we're doing an installation, would you come along?" And I'm open. But it is basically a man standing behind a laptop. I don't know how interesting that is for people to see. But the right context with some cool visuals, yeah, I could imagine that, yeah.
And what about, I'm going to ask it simply just to get it out of the way. What about PT? It's just still in a static place right now and see what happens, whatever happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think with PT, with reference to all the things we talked about, if we were going to make another record, we'd need to feel like there was a reason. Like we're not going to just do the same again. I don't know what we would do. We'd have to find some new way, new twist on the sound or something like that. So I would never say never, but it's not going to be for a while. Let's just say that.
Okay, so everybody, down in the description are Steven's links to his website, to his Instagram, to his Facebook, to a direct link. I don't know, have they sold out of itself yet, or is it close?
I think it's pretty close. It's a very small edition, just 1,500 copies. Yeah. So
do you envision doing vinyl?
Do you know what? I don't think so for this. This is music made for CD for me. This is perfect. I'm not a vinyl fanatic in the sense I think everything sounds better on vinyl. Yeah. Some things CD was meant for. Ambient music, drone music, music with a lot of silence and space. CD is the best medium for me.
I think album is the best medium when you want to make a presentation of killer graphics and an expanded.
But this has got a beautiful artwork. It's got a little anyway, you'll see when you get your copy finally.
Yeah. Hey, hang on one sec. Thanks to everybody that popped in tonight. Really appreciate it. Really well attended tonight. We had over 25 people at one point in time, which is really cool in the middle of the afternoon. Did I ask about Michael being a guest on my podcast? No, I'll talk about Steve privately on that. So hang loose one sec, Steve. And everybody, thanks for checking in. Don't forget, everybody, we've got the gas mask and hand grenades t-shirts. Yes, I'm in the marketing business myself now. So check that out. The first 2 batches have gone out. They look killer. Steve, hang on one sec. All right. Thanks, everybody. Any final words, Steve?
Just thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I've enjoyed the conversation very much. I hope everyone else has too.
All right. Hang loose one second.
No worries.